I used to joke that we're the Chicago Cubs of cyberspace. We might win a few games. We won a World Series once, but we lose more often than we win because the game is stacked against us. So there's this.
This is Code and Country with host Ian L. Paterson.
So welcome to Code and Country, where we explore the intersection of cybersecurity, national security, and technology. Our guest today is Matthew O'Neill, a retired senior executive at the United States Secret Service, where he spent 25 years leading cybercrime investigations, asset forfeiture operations, and global enforcement strategy against transnational criminal groups. Matthew helped build the Global Investigative Operations Center, directed operations targeting ransomware groups and dark web marketplaces, and oversaw the seizure of billions in illicit assets, including hundreds of millions in cryptocurrency. Today, Matthew is the co-founder and partner at 50H Consulting, where he advises private sector organizations on cyber resilience, cryptocurrency-enabled crime, and incident response strategy. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start from the beginning. You began your Secret Service career, I think, 1998, and built a reputation as an undercover cyber case agent. So what pulled you into that line of work?
It was interesting. So in the Secret Service, you have really two options. You can work protection or you can work cases, criminal cases. Now, there's a lot of overlap where people do both, but a lot of people gravitate towards one or the other. I gravitated towards working criminal investigations because I was fortunate enough when I first came on the job to get some really interesting cases that took either myself or peers from my office all around the world. And I found that to be a lot more interesting than protection. I was probably, I would say, not the best protection agent, but I got bored quickly of standing post. And I realized I like traveling around the world and trying to arrest bad guys a lot more.
So you spent years creating personas and writing cross-border operations to lure high-value cyber criminals. What did that experience teach you?
Patience first, the need to work collaboratively across agencies around the world. So the value of interpersonal, non-transactional relationships, and also the ability to be agile, because as you could come up with a great plan, but it only survives first contact. So in many instances, I would set up intricate lore operations thinking, oh, well, he's definitely going to fall for this, but he had no interest in that. And so then you had to quickly learn how to pivot to do something else.
How would one of these operations actually work? Like what are you luring with the bad guys? I mean, what are you hoping that they're going to dump on?
Sure. So it depends on each individual, but the challenge and the reason why you do lures is because if the individual is located in a part of the world that there's not an extradition agreement in place, you have basically limited options. You can wait for them to travel. Oh, you could do basically unseal an indictment and make it public. So you hope maybe somebody turns them in or whatnot. And then the third is to do a lure operation. So the goal is to arrest the individual in a part of the world, whether it's in the US or a partner country, where you can actually apprehend them and put them to trial. But everybody has vulnerabilities. So it's about trying to understand what their vulnerabilities are. Is it financial? Is it women? Is it some combination of that? And so how you do that is you spend a lot of time combing through, whether it's their social media, or when I was doing it, it was primarily doing search warrants for email accounts and going through hundreds of thousands of emails, looking to get a better understanding of who they are, what interests them, and basically trying to figure out a way to, now the terminology is catfish, but basically try to catfish them to try to get them to travel.
So this is the sort of the quintessential all expenses paid tickets to a theme resort. This is kind of where you're going with it?
It depends. So I'll give you a couple examples. The first example would be there was an individual out of Romania that was responsible for hacking into 800 some victim merchants around the world, stealing payment cards. He was a robotics engineer, went to the University of Craiova, but spent most of his time online gambling. And so I was working with a casino that I was familiar with and friendly with, and basically created a persona from the casino to say, hey, we know that you're on PokerStars and you're on this and you're on that. We have this Texas Hold'em tournament. Think it would be a great opportunity for you to come visit. Therefore, when you go back to Romania, you're going to tell people to come visit us and don't go to whether it's Vegas or somewhere else. And we had enough information because I knew from all of his emails how much he was gambling and all that kind of stuff. So we created that legitimacy. We created the persona online and the email address, phone numbers, that kind of thing. But he wasn't particularly interested in that. So I started commenting on his appearance because my persona was a 25-year-old female. And so I was saying, oh, sometimes you just say things that I don't know why I said it. I said, you look like a young Al Pacino. And he's like, oh, well, thank you very much. And then, because what you realize is a lot of people, they're spending 20 hours a day either working or hacking. And so he didn't have a lot of female relationships. So I glommed on that because I'm like, I was once a 23-year-old kid. I know exactly what he wants to hear. So I'm just going to tell him what he wants to hear over a period of 6 to 7 months to induce him to travel. So by the time he traveled, we were in what we would consider a quasi-romantic relationship in the sense that he thought he was in a romantic relationship. And so that's how we were able to get him to come to Boston Logan Airport, where we arrested him. And in many instances, the other secondary value of the lore is it defeats what we'll call the SOTI defense. Some other dude did it. So if I'm communicating with you and I know that your persona is committing all these crimes and I get that persona to travel, what are you going to say? You just traveled from Romania to the United States and you're here. You're not going to say it wasn't me because we just blew up that entire sort of defense.
Thank you for listening to Code and Country, sponsored by Plurilock. If you're enjoying this episode, please remember to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast. And now, back to the episode.
It's super interesting. And so, I mean, is this the type of thing that you would run against ransomware gangs or other financially motivated online crime groups?
Sure. Wherever we thought it would be particularly effective, we would try to run similar kind of plays. Sometimes they're probably more complicated or more having more steps. So we lured an individual out of Vietnam and he was not interested in women. He already had a girlfriend and stuff, but he was interested in business and he was making several $1 million a year. We were able to shut down his business. But then I created a persona combining real world individuals that we had arrested that had become informants and fake personas to induce him to travel to Guam where we arrested him. So you just have to go through specific steps. You just can't do this without any oversight. So you have to work through the Department of Justice Office of International Affairs. You have to go through the embassy of which you're trying to lure the person from. And really what we're trying to do is the sort of threshold is, will this shock the moral conscience? If it's on the front page of the Washington Post, would we be embarrassed? And so that was always kind of like the guiding line. So, but we would write these lures in such a vague way that we weren't constricted to, oh, well, if this, like in the gambling example, if that doesn't work, then we have to start fresh. So you try to create like scenario A, B, C. So then therefore it provided you maximum flexibility.
I mean, this seems like it's fairly resource intensive.
No, it was literally just me. And a lot of times my prosecutor and I would always joke because the defense attorneys would always say, the entire U.S. government is behind this. It was literally just me and him. And so because it's really I always used to say my best ability is availability. So it's really, are you willing to put in the work to be available 24/7, 365? Because these guys were online 24/7, 365. And so where it became somewhat challenging is in many instances, we had multiple lore operations going on at the same time. So I had to switch my head to go, oh, I'm talking to this person, my persona is this, and not mix them up and conflate them along the way.
So let's maybe switch gears. You helped build and scale the Global Investigative Operations Center. So what was it? What problem were you trying to solve?
Sure. So the challenge that the Secret Service had at that time, this was 2017, is if you look back historically at what the Secret Service investigates, it's white collar fraud. And so when I came on in the late 90s, it was counterfeit money and counterfeit checks primarily, and credit card fraud. Our victims were located certainly in our district. So like I was in New Haven, so the district of Connecticut, so they were in the state of Connecticut. And most likely the bad actors, the criminals, were located in the same district, if not the same zip code or not area code. So the agency didn't have a lot of analytical capabilities, or because they didn't need them, because most of those cases were worked through sort of gumshoe detective work, surveillances, trash pulls, pull cameras. It's all sort of labor intensive, manpower intensive out on the street. As criminals evolved to more online cyber criminals, and that's where we went towards, we needed to stand up our analytical capabilities. our agent to analyst ratio was 55-1. The FBI's was 7-1. So that was problem number one. Problem two is we didn't have the tools that other agencies had because we hadn't put that focus and energy on making sure that at no time did an agent say, oh, but for this, I could have solved this case. And then the third reason was because we didn't really have a good way of knowing what anybody else was doing. So I was located in New Hampshire, but out of the Boston office. I had no idea what New York was doing, let alone Philadelphia or Miami or other agencies, because the FBI had concurrent jurisdiction over the cases that we were working, as did IRSCI, HSI. So the idea was to create a hub to provide investigative, analytical, and logistical support to field offices as they're working cases. So then, therefore, if they needed help, we were there to help them across any sort of area that they needed, to include sourcing additional funding for whether it's more travel or undercover operations to buy, whether it's payment cards, PII, and whatnot. So it basically became, they didn't want to use the term for whatever reason. Somebody in senior management didn't like the idea of a fusion center. So we didn't call it a fusion center, but it was pretty much a fusion center.
And so in your view, what is a fusion center? What makes it effective versus becoming just another intelligence node?
So information sharing, taking seemingly disparate data from across the agency's investigative enterprise and sort of doing that analysis, boiling them together, taking small cases, making them large cases, working with our partner agencies in a collaborative and not confrontational manner, because there was a legacy of sort of turf battles between these agencies, and then really providing what is truly a whole of government approach to working these cases. And we had immediate successes. One of the first cases that came to us when the operations center started, it was me and 2 contract analysts and 1 full-time employee analyst, and that was it. We had to kind of come from the area of like, hey, let's just get our word out there. And we started working with a specific office, Miami, that had information on Venezuelan nationals that were entering the country through Mexico, that were doing ATM jackpotting, specifically on these Diebold Optiva 750 ATMs. And so we pushed out what we would call now like a JIOC alert, and we pushed it out to all of our field offices. And in those field offices, you also had cyber fraud task forces that had local police departments, and then also private industry as well, so banks and things like that. And within 24 hours, that alert made its way to basically the entire network, and arrests were made. We got calls from a bank in New England and coincidentally in Connecticut, and we were able to make arrests. And then from that general intelligence, we were able to build out an international case supporting the Miami field office that made, scores of arrests and really shut down what was a very large operation, but it was siloed in all these different offices or in the Secret Service and FBI, and people hadn't put it together that, hey, wait a second, this isn't, people thought at that time, oh, is this somebody just stealing money out of the ATM? Like some old fashioned way, or is it the Brinks driver or whatnot? And we were able to piece it together to say, no, this was ATM jackpotting, because here are the TTPs that we had found, opening the top hat, removing from the internet, things like that. And these guys were pretty bold. They would go literally into Costco's in the middle of the day with like a jacket that says like Diebold on it. And they were just stealing money and no one ever stopped them. That was the first sort of indication that, hey, we're onto something. And that led to, we started working cases with the FBI on DPRK actors that were doing global cash out operations. And it just kind of expanded as we were getting more people, more funding. And it was kind of on the model of people, process, tools. So first I needed people, then we had to develop a process that makes sense. And then we had to go out and procure the tools that would really sort of be that enabling function for the operations center.
So it's interesting. You touched on international cooperation there, and I mean, one of the things that we see frequently is that the ransomware gang or the threat actor is not in North America, right? They're in Eastern Europe, they're in Latin America, they're in Southeast Asia. So how does the relationship work when you're working abroad?
So the first is the Secret Service has field offices all around the world that have responsibility for every country. So it's identifying, do they already have a relationship with wherever that is? The second is using existing apparatus like Europol in The Hague or Interpol Cybercrime Center in Singapore and figuring out what touch points that we can find. But really what it boils down to more than often than not is traveling. So I used to tell the agents in the Global Operations Center, if you need to go somewhere, get on the plane and go. We're 30 minutes from Dulles Airport. You can be anywhere in the world in 15 hours. Go. Because it was my experience, whether it was going to places like Romania or Moldova or Kazakhstan, wherever, going there shows that the local host country that we're serious and we're cooperative. So provide them all the information that we can, because without their support, you're not going to be able to make any arrests, because they're not going to allow you to do a lower operation or do an extradition or build out a larger case. So it really comes down to the tried and true, get to know the person. Don't make this, hey, we're big bad federal agents coming from the United States and we want this. We're all on the same team, hopefully. And then and if it doesn't work out, it's just a case. We'll move on to something else.
So let's maybe go to the aggregate, because ultimately you oversaw programs that seized billions in illicit assets. So from a deterrence standpoint, how does asset seizure actually impact cybercrime?
So it's really important because for cybercrime, specifically financially motivated cybercriminals, their ultimate goal is to make money. And so if you can disgorge them from their ill-gotten gains, you're putting basically a tax on their ability to operate, because a lot of them will fund their infrastructure and expand their operations with their proceeds. So trying to disgorge them from their ill-gotten gains and provide them. So one, it disrupts their grouping. The second is it provides, in most instances, there's a victim component. So because it's not financially motivated crime, by definition, somebody is going to lose money. So we're very successful in recovering money for victims, and then whether it's through the asset forfeiture process or through hold harmless agreements working with banks, get money back to victims in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
So when you look at overall impact, like what's the thing that actually does deter cybercrime? Is it arrests? Is it seizures? Infrastructure takedowns? Doxing the bad guys? Like what have you found actually have the impact?
I don't think we're that all impactful, to be perfectly honest, because as you mentioned earlier, most cyber criminals that we're going after are located in parts of the world that we have very limited reach. I used to joke that we're the Chicago Cubs of cyberspace. We might win a few games. We won a World Series once, but we lose more often than we win because the game is stacked against us. So there's this tried and true strategy that, if we do this, it'll work to disrupt and dismantle these groups, knock them off their X. I think it's a combination, is arrest as many people as you possibly can. That's number one. Number two is seize as much of their funding as you can, or destroy their infrastructure. But the problem with all of them is you have limited. So take pig butchering, for example, where they're stealing literally billions of dollars a year, and say we recover $500 million. That's a rounding error in many instances for some of these groups, but it's a big impact for the victims that are getting the money back. So it's a combination. There's not one thing that you would say, if we do this, we'll be successful. I think more and more, these are not necessarily law enforcement problems. These are problems that need to be dealt with at the executive branch, in the State Department, at the national security level. Because take, for example, pig butchering, where you have scam factories in the Golden Triangle, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia. If the FBI director, Secret Service director, put every single agent on that problem, we're going to have limited impact, because we can't arrest them because we can't get there. And they're moving money so fast through illicit means and through cryptocurrency that our ability to impact that's somewhat limited as well. But what is impactful is pressure from State Department, from other areas of government, to force their governments to do something. So it really is moving to an area where law enforcement can provide the information to those parts of government. And I'm not saying there's no role there. We can clearly be impactful, but to say that we're sort of like the only area to focus on is probably one of the reasons why fraud losses in the United States in 2017, when we started our Global Operations Center, the reports to the IC3 was $4.2 billion or something like that. Last year, it was $16 billion. So law enforcement is not in a position to say, we know what we're like, we have the formula to stop it, because it's grown exponentially. Despite all of the additional manpower and tools and technology at disposal, we're still losing. And we're losing for a variety of reasons. And primarily the answer is also on private sector side. our ability for financial institutions to share information at scale under 314B is broken. 314A, which enables law enforcement to ping banks, is broken. So our entire apparatus that was created after 9/11 is fundamentally broken. And so until we can fix that, and law enforcement can't fix that, that has to be, from Department of Treasury and from the banking industry and from all these other sort of take social media. Like, we have to start holding people accountable in a much stronger way than we are now, because something like 70% of the cyber criminal activity originates on social media. Yet everybody's looking at banking to solve the problem. And so I think we need to have a conversation in this country of how are we going to take a whole of government approach, whether it's creating a national anti-scam center modeled off of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We have to do something different because what we're doing right now is not working.
So you mentioned pig butchering a couple of times. Maybe just for the listener, walk through what is that? How does that work?
Sure. So it's essentially a crypto investment scam where someone is contacted either through social media, through a dating website, or just even through text messages, develops a relationship with the individual, and then essentially it transitions into, hey, you should do an investment with us because we're making a lot of money and we have this formula to make money off of cryptocurrency, basically. And so then the person's given basically a login and a website that looks legitimate to them, and they'll put in a little bit of money. In some instances, they'll even get a little money back. Oh, wow, I put in $1,000. I just got $700. Let me just put more money in. And so basically, they're providing more and more money where there's no investment. They're just essentially stealing the money. And then at the very end, when you, the victim, say, hey, I want to basically withdraw my proceeds, they'll even hit them and say, hey, well, you just have to pay taxes. You have to do this, provide even more money. And then at the end of the day, they're ghosted and they're gone. So that's the other challenge is you have these hosting providers that are sitting on thousands of dormant websites that are all substantively similar, that are all being used to basically scam people. And so pig butchering essentially is translated from a Mandarin phrase that I'll butcher, but basically you're, to be blunt, you're basically fattening the pig and you're slaughtering it. That's kind of where it comes from in my sort of public school education translation of what the term comes from.
And it's definitely a problem right now. I'm curious from your experience, what do you see are the significant either groups or operations that are impacting society today?
So I would start with, we are in a scam epidemic. So I would start there. And so you look at what worries me the most is you have these scam factories that are essentially human trafficking people, some knowingly, some unknowingly, and essentially holding them hostage. Now, when you combine that with the ability now to use AI, you can scale it a lot faster and you can put them on other problems. So no longer do I just focus on pig butchering, but I could do malware droppers for Android devices, for banking applications all around the world. I could pivot to do, think of like the Easy Pass scams that were going around where people are getting text messages to say, oh, well, you owe us money. I could pivot, and because I've already built the infrastructure. So by far and away, that's the biggest concern that individual consumers would have. The second would be business email compromise. In 2017, that was the #1 fraud loss. Now it's the #2 fraud loss. We haven't made any material impact in that. That's still a massive problem. And then obviously, you mentioned ransomware. That continues to be a problem. I don't see that going away anytime soon. The formula is working, and it really, when you start looking at why crypto investment scams and ransomware have exploded, it's also with the more rapid adoption of cryptocurrency. So the cat's out of the bag there, and that's never going to change. So therefore, I suspect those fraud losses are going to continue to grow.
Do you have a point of view? I mean, if you're a private sector company or even a public sector agency, you get hit with ransomware, you have some mission critical, business critical system that has to run. I mean, what's your point of view? Should a ransom be paid?
Well, I think that it is based on each individual business. I can't be in a perfect world, I'd say no, because you're funding basically the bad actors. And if you starve them, they're going to move on to something else. But we have to be recognizing that if this is a extinction level event for a business, who am I to say that they can't pay the ransom in order to recover their business? The double extortion is an interesting sort of thing where we could debate that, where if the bad actors are providing you with the keys, but also extorting you for the data that they exfilled, like, why are you trusting a cyber criminal gang that they're actually going to delete your data and not continue to hold it or sell it to monetize it? So it is one of those things where I recognize it's a complicated matter. But the other thing is, with the technology we have available today, ransomware should be much more easily identified and defeated. Whether it's creating immutable backups in your, like, what enables ransomware groups? It's basically getting into backups and destroying your ability to recover. So if you focus on that and say, like, at all times, we're going to have immutable backups to be able to recover, and there's tools that are available today that are enable them to do that, then you're much more likely to be able to recover from a ransomware attack. In my view, there's, new 0 days found every single day. If you're using traditional endpoint detection, you're going to lose. You're going to have to figure out a way to, and then practice as well. Create tabletop exercises, run through the process. Don't just say we have a plan, but I actually pressure test the plan. Engage with law enforcement. I used to sit on a bunch of tabletops up in Boston where I was like, hey, you guys are doing a tabletop exercise. Just call me whenever. Don't tell me what your scenario is. Just call me and I'll tell you what I would do. And then now it's more realistic. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think it's very complicated. And I'm not in a position to say whether they should or should not. In a perfect world, we wouldn't be, but that's not realistic if a business is going to go under if they don't pay.
Matt, after 25 years in cyber investigations, what's the single biggest lesson the private sector should take away from law enforcement?
From law enforcement, it is engage. Know who your agents are in your area. Don't just say, I'm going to call the FBI. Say, I'm going to call Christine O'Neill in the Boston office, and I have her number, and I have her personal number, because the time is of the essence. Money is moving faster than ever before. In the 2017, when I was in the field, basically you had 72 hours from the time the money was stolen to the time we could recover. Now that's now 24 hours. And so if you're an organization that does what I'll call the Super Bowl of finger pointing before you even reach out to law enforcement, that money is going to be gone. So you have to make a decision as to, are we going to try to recover the funds? How are we going to engage with law enforcement? Join your InfraGuard, join your cyber fraud task force, and be involved and engaged and actually have a plan that has a chance of succeeding that first contact.
Matt, I think we could probably talk here for another couple hours, but where can people find you online?
So they could just go to 50hconsulting.com, 50consulting.com. That's where we have a team of senior executives from across law enforcement and private sector. And so that's where they can find us.
Matt, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Code and Country.